We're back. Hello and welcome to Alien Perspective. For more videos looking at politics from a bigger picture perspective, and for videos on the autistic experience, please subscribe. So today's video is going to be not only on that linear left-right spectrum, but also the political compass test. Now I remember, late in high school, but early in my political development, I got introduced to this political compass test, and I was all over it, because it gave me that nuance that I was looking for. Because you know the problems with that left-right spectrum, right? That are fixed by the political compass test, such as, well, where do you fit in libertarians? They're super right-wing on economics, but they're allegedly anti-authoritarian. And likewise, how is it that the far left can have both anarchists and communists? Well, the political compass test, by adding that second dimension, having the economics on one level and the social policy on another, gives you that nuance. By the way, if I was going to make a basic-ass video about this, that's what this video would entirely be about. If the left-right spectrum is more government on one end and less government on the other end, how do you factor in the Nazis, who had really big government, but they're on the right?
If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. This question has such a leftist bias. I definitely clipped the audio on that one. It was stupid. I'm probably keeping that in.
So let's get to core problem number one. And that is that when it comes to politics, what matters is your actions and your effect on other people. I think this Jackie Robinson quote is perfect. A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. And I think that should translate into politics. So for example, if you're a libertarian and you believe in gay marriage, the political compass test will rate you lower on social authoritarianism. But if they vote for Republican candidates who are opposed to marriage equality, and that same libertarian doesn't go to the demonstration that's for marriage equality, doesn't donate to LGBT plus organizations fighting in the courts to make marriage equality a reality. I get that this is a bit outdated of an example, but follow. Just go with me on this. Are they really for gay marriage? Are they really for marriage equality? If all of their actions demonstrate either apathy or opposition? So my first core critique of the political compass and the left-right spectrum is that it's about your actions. It's about what you do. It's about how you affect other people's lives, not about your intentions or how you feel. And the second point, and I'm going to get to a third one, but the second point is that communist states and the hardcore Ayn Rand level libertarians are just as fascist as fascists. The idea that the economic left and right are divided singularly by how much government intervenes in the economy. This is baffling to me. How corrupted by American small government talking points do you have to be to think of politics as being so narrow, to have the blinders on so strongly? As if government is the only source of tyranny and authoritarianism. See, ultimately, I think that the political spectrum, I really appreciate the nuance within the two-dimensional political compass test, but I think you can whittle everything down into a linear spectrum between dominance and cooperation. Let me illustrate my point, and I'm going to challenge you, the viewer. I want you to join me in taking the alien perspective of really looking at things without the context of your culture corrupting your brain.
So what was Leninism? Well, here we have to look at the facts. Now, you look at the facts, I think here's what you find. Lenin was a right-wing deviation of the socialist movement, and he was so regarded. He was regarded as that by the Marxists, by the mainstream Marxists. We've forgotten who the mainstream Marxists were because they lost.
So I didn't quite ace what I wanted to say in my original take, so take two. By the way, is it like visual cruelty that we went from the crappiest set of all time to this beautiful, beautiful outside view? So I wrote this list, I literally wrote it out because I'm from the year 1840, and I wrote out a bunch of similarities between authoritarian systems that have different labels attached to them. A massive restriction or complete absence of civil liberties such as free speech, free assembly. A restriction on the types of art that were supported. Imperialism. And don't be telling me that the Soviet Union was not imperialistic. Don't be telling me that. Secret police. Now, we know about the Gestapo, we know about the KGB, but there's also the Pinkertons, which are a more private form of secret police. But really, when you look at them from an alien perspective, are these police types really all that different? And by the way, they all crack down on anti-authoritarian leftists. Speaking of violence against anti-authoritarian leftists.
Then Lenin took power in October 1917 in what's called a revolution, but in my view ought to be called a coup. One of the things that followed it was the immediate moves to destroy the Soviets and the factory councils. Those were some of the first moves of Lenin and Trotsky after they took, Trotsky joined at that point, after they took state power.
Centralized control of resources. Now, this can be in the form of the state capturing the resources, or it can come in the form of corporations, which, again, alien perspective, is there a difference between an unaccountable group of CEOs or an unaccountable group of party officials in a state apparatus? Is there that much of a difference? A high degree of religiosity that actually has nothing to do with organized religion. So the most obvious form is the cult of personalities, but another form is the cult of the free market. And of course, propaganda. There's this wonderful quote from Noam Chomsky about advertisements where he talks about how if this were really a free market based off of logical decision-making, every advertisement would be, here are the list of qualities that make this car or this drink the best thing. But no, it's all about an appeal to emotions, which is a form of corporate propaganda. I don't think I have to explain the communist or fascist propaganda. I think you know that that already existed. And I think one of the most important aspects is that the workplace, the place that we spend half of our waking lives, is also deeply authoritarian. The irony is that communist states fail on the basic critique of capitalism that Marx had, which is that a corporation, that a company, a business, is run like an autocracy with an unaccountable dictator known as the CEO at the top. And ironically, they did not replace that hierarchy with a democratic system. It just got replaced by another form of hierarchy, but the social dynamic was ultimately the same.
Lenin reconstructed the czarist systems of oppression often more efficiently, Cheka, KGB, and other techniques of control and oppression. I think from that point on, there was nothing remotely like socialism in the Soviet Union. I think it was, in fact, in my view, it was a precursor of later forms of totalitarianism.
My whole point with this is that if we're going to stick to that left-right spectrum, we really should put the communist governments that have existed on Earth on the far-right authoritarian side of the political spectrum, because the outcomes are just so similar. The power dynamics between worker and government, between worker and manager, are ultimately very, very similar. And by the way, libertarianism, because of the outcomes that it has, should be in the authoritarian right wing as well. And that's because between fascist societies, communist societies, libertarian societies, they all have authoritarianism just seeping into every aspect of life. And in my view, in what I think the alien perspective would be, societies in which a small group of unelected people monopolize decision-making on basically every important aspect of our quality of life, that should go on the same end of the spectrum. If you've got a spectrum in which there are two governmental systems with roughly the same outcome, they should not be on both ends of your spectrum. If they are, you got a broken spectrum. And I know what I'm talking about when it comes to spectrums. Well, the sun's going down, so back to me on the spaceship, or whatever the lore of my channel is. Politics is all about the distribution of power. See, when I think about the alien perspective, one component is that you see past how arbitrary a lot of things are. Like, does a dominant system really matter if it calls itself a corporation versus a political party? I don't really think there's that much of a difference. Because ultimately they function the same way. The dynamics between humans is the same. In other words, there's a power imbalance between those who are ruling and those who are serving. So I'd like to give a more lighthearted analogy as to why the Soviet Union is a leftist government, or how libertarianism is anti-authoritarian, that these are just aesthetics, that this is just lipstick on a pig. So let's talk about Star Wars. I remember in one of those RedLetterMedia Mr. Plinkett reviews where they contrasted Star Trek and Star Wars, and the example given was, in Star Trek there's a lot of time devoted to how the warp drive works, how the faster-than-light travel functions, how the antimatter-matter engine thing, how it all operates, right? This is all science-y kind of stuff. Whereas in Star Wars, the engines just get characters from one place to another. There's no deeper examination of the science underlying the universe of Star Wars. Instead, in Star Wars, what we get is the one, destiny, magic, a good versus evil battle that's black and white. We get sword fights between knights. These are all elements of fantasy. And in the words of internet legend Rich Evans, Star Wars is just fantasy with some space paint on it. In the same way that communism is left-wing and that libertarianism is freedom, that those are just lipstick on the right-wing authoritarian pig. We're going to get to my favorite, my third big picture point, and this is probably my favorite, and that is that psychology ultimately backs all of this talk about the aesthetics up, and it completely breaks the idea of left-wing authoritarianism. How about a more intimate setting for a topic that's very close to my heart? The authoritarian personality is one of my favorite political topics. When I was in grad school, I took a political psychology class, and I basically used it to study authoritarianism. I did a literature review. People know what a literature review is? Basically what you do is you take a topic, and I chose left-wing authoritarianism. Is that even a thing? That was the point of my literature review, and basically you read every book, every academic paper that's ever been written on this subject, and you summarize it. So after World War II, a bunch of research was poured into the authoritarian personality. I'm sure you can figure out why. So that involved trying to diagnose what are the characteristics of the authoritarian personality, particularly the right-wing authoritarian personality. And alongside that search was the question of, does left-wing authoritarianism exist as a personality? And if so, how is it different from right-wing authoritarianism? You know, what's the difference between the communist personality and the fascist personality? There was this pattern where academics would create some new distinction between a left-wing and a right-wing authoritarian personality, and then every time they'd test, they'd be like, all right, we got this new definition, and then they'd test it out, and it'd be like, no, they're the same. It basically all broke down into right-wing authoritarianism. There's this particular study that really stuck with me. It was done in the breakup of the Soviet Union. Academics figured, all right, former communist state, if we're going to find left-wing authoritarianism, this has got to be the best situation for us. And let me read one particular thing that really stuck out to me. The Communist Party in what became the Soviet Union quickly became a quasi-right-wing authority after the revolution of 1917. Party leaders quickly separated themselves from the rest of society and created their own class. And researchers found, despite the different status quo, that the authoritarian personality manifested itself in the exact same way. The researchers found that the authoritarians in post-Soviet Russia had the aggression on behalf of authority. They submitted to that authority, and they were strongly driven by conventionalism or traditionalism. Now, traditionalism in the West, in America, that means laissez-faire capitalism, for example. But because communism was the status quo for so long, that became the tradition that the authoritarians wanted to defend and preserve. In other words, those are the three qualities that Bob Altemeyer lines out as being the defining characteristics of the right-wing authoritarian personality, and those are the three characteristics that defined the post-Soviet Russian citizen authoritarians. In other words, there ain't no such thing as left-wing authoritarianism. Now, part of the reason why all authoritarianism should be lumped into the right wing is because there's a ton of overlap between the conservative personality and the right-wing authoritarian personality. Let me list off some examples. So, reduced critical thinking skills, larger amygdala, more black and white thinking, an inability to adequately and accurately distinguish threats. So this is, for example, the reason why authoritarians and conservatives here in America will freak out about Potato Head and Dr. Seuss and Obama phones and FEMA camps and race mixing, and yet they don't care about the big issues such as how our healthcare system kills 70,000 Americans a year and is the #1 cause of bankruptcy. Whereas there really is no overlap between the progressive psychology and the right-wing authoritarian psychology. The combination of outcomes and psychology lead me to a very obvious conclusion that the political spectrum is far more simple than the nuanced political compass test would have you think. That ultimately, on one end, you have authoritarianism, you have domination, you have hierarchy. And on the other end, you have cooperation and you have freedom. And that ultimately, it's our actions that define where we are on that spectrum. If you'd like more videos looking at the big picture of politics, please subscribe. Alright, now get out of my room. I gotta go to sleep. Bye-bye.